I'm very pleased to welcome two very special guests in the Ritman Library today. First place, Dr. Marco Pasi, Associate Professor at the University of Amsterdam. Here today in the library to do the filming of a webinar on Arthur Edward Waite, but because he's always very dynamic and traveling into many unexpected and unexplored areas, at least that goes for the library, he brought today to the library Professor Jeronimo Pizarro, who's considered one of the most prominent experts in Fernando Pessoa. And I'm pleased to have you both here in the library, and I would like to ask you some questions because you have made me very curious. I have to apologize because we don't collect literature in the first place in the library. I have to admit we don't have Pessoa in the library, but it seems there is such interesting connections, so I have some questions for you. Maybe in the first place, Jerónimo, you can tell us something about Pessoa and what the connection with this library would be, according to you.
Well, thank you so much. If we think about modernism and the relation with esotericism in Portugal, we have to think about Fernando Pessoa. He is the main reference. We have to think Western esotericism in Portugal and maybe in the Iberian Peninsula at the time. So he was a poet, he was a writer, he was also in a way a philosopher. He moved through different areas all his life. He never tried to specialize only in one area. He was also a translator, a critic, a publisher, many things. He lived in South Africa almost 10 years in the colony of Natal. So he went with his mother to meet the stepfather that was the Portuguese consul in South Africa, in Natal. And those 10 years in this English colony were very important because most of the writings he left in one or two famous trunks are in English. And most of his esoteric writings are in English. So that helps us a lot. He was reading in French, in English, some Portuguese books on esotericism, but when we think about esotericism and Pessoa, most of the things we have to transcribe are already in English.
And you are referring to trunks? Are those some magic boxes? What can
Yeah, well, he was known for writing maybe 3, 4, 5 texts a day, and he left almost 30,000 sheet papers in those trunks. So when he died, he had published some things. He had published many poems, some one or two book reviews, some interviews, some of his translations. But most of the things he wrote between 1888 and 1935, in those 47 years he lived, most things weren't published by 1935. So we are working both with things that he published, but those are few, and with that vast majority of things that he left unpublished in his trunks. And in his trunks he left all kind of written production, and he wrote under many names or pen names. So in one of the last books that was published in Portugal, we consider that Fernando Pessoa divided himself in 136 figures, and that he created 135 different authors not just pen names or not just characters, almost authors as himself. And in those trunks, we are also reading what he left and what he attributed to many, many different characters, fictitious characters created by himself.
Oh, how very interesting. And actually you know each other because you have been working together at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies to research the contents of these trunks, and basically also because of that the esoteric interests of Pessoa, which we don't know so very much about. And could you tell Marco something more about this research, this fellowship that you did at the NIAS?
Yes, well, Jeronimo and I, we know each other already for quite some time, before the NIAS, of course, we took place in 2012. I have been working on Pessoa's esotericism for quite a number of years. Actually, it has been one of my earliest interests in the field of esotericism. It goes back to 1992, 1993. And it started because Pessoa at one point was interested in the writings of another occultist, Esther Ritman, whom he met also at one point in Lisbon. And so, at the time I was doing research on Aleister Crowley and I came across Pessoa. Pessoa, already by the time, was considered as one of the major figures of 20th century literature, really international literature. And I realized that there was a very strong esoteric element in his works, in his thought, and already I had the idea at that time to go deeper, to do some research in this direction. Well, then I did some research at the time, but I was also sidetracked by other interests, other projects. And then, well, I met Jerónimo, I think it must be already 4 years ago. We had met in Lisbon because I was there for doing research, and I knew that Jerónimo was one of the most important specialists in Pessoa studies now. And so after we met, well, we had the idea perhaps to combine our expertise, to put it together, because he is a philologist and he has the ability to read all of the handwritten texts by Pessoa. It's very difficult because Pessoa has a very peculiar handwriting. Sometimes it's very difficult to read, sometimes it's written in pencil. So it's also almost impossible to decipher. Yeah. So from my side, of course, I have the expertise in the history of esotericism, in the history of esoteric ideas. So we thought that together we could work on a project for the study of Pessoa's esotericism, which has been studied by other scholars before. But we think that there is so much more that can be done. There are texts that have never been published, that are still unknown. This is why we decided to apply for a fellowship at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies, which is in Wassenaar, close to The Hague. And well, the application was successful, and so we spent the whole semester there, the first half of 2012. Working in what are perfect conditions for scholars, because you have a very nice office space for yourself, you have the whole of the Royal Library at The Hague at your disposal, and all the other libraries in the Netherlands. You ask for a book the day after, they bring it to you in your office, so it's really fantastic. And since the papers of Pessoa have been digitalized, it is also easy enough to work on the material, even if you're not physically in the National Library in Lisbon, where the actual paper documents are preserved. You can do checks and controls later, but in principle you can do a large part of the work for this kind of research anywhere, because you have the digital scans of the actual documents.
You brought today this wonderfully designed publication of the private library of Pessoa. and I'm really impressed. There's some 1,000 titles here. Could you tell us some more about this cataloging project?
Well, this was a collective project we did in Lisbon for free for many weeks, taking photographs of every book and every page of this library, bringing together different projects of cataloging this library, this private library. And it was very important because this is a library where you have a lot of notes. So Pessoa is not the kind of writer that will just write and do nothing to the books. He will read the books and he will take many notes, and sometimes even he will leave a poem in a book. He will draw an horoscope. He will left a maxim, an aphorism. So to read Pessoa, we also have to read his library. So we digitalize this library also to show that it's a library that covers all possible areas of knowledge. And in terms of esotericism, you can really find in Pessoa's library many interesting subjects. Not only astrology, he read a lot about astrology because he tried himself to be an astrologer. Also, there's a lot of on hermetic literature, on alchemy, on Gnosticism. There are some books on Aleister Crowley because he met Aleister Crowley in 1930 when he went to Portugal for some days. On neo-paganism, on Freemasonry, on secret societies, and on reflections on the Catholic Church, and even on Oriental thought. So it's a very rich library of someone that all his life tried to be interested by different subjects and not to specialize himself. He will defend that a specialization, any kind of a specialization, was a kind of almost a stupid attitude towards the world, and he was as open to all kind of knowledge all of his life. And that is present in his library. So I think that it's very important for us as researchers not only to read what he left in his famous trunks, but to read his books, and to read his books reading his notes.
When I opened this catalog this morning, my eyes were drawn towards a beautiful quote of Pessoa, and he writes, philosophy looks through the appearance of things, not into the heart of things, but into that which makes their appearance, so into their inner nature. And to me, that seems such a perfect synthesis, so to say, of all the collecting areas here in this Hermetic library. And so I was wondering, Marco, you must have studied especially all the esoteric sources that you have found in his collection. Could you say something more about it? Because the second book that I saw, so to say, was Arthur Edward Waite, on the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, and you are here today for the webinar on Waite. So there are so many connections. Can you tell something more about it?
Well, first of all, it is difficult to summarize Pessoa's esoteric views for a number of reasons. The first one is that he was very eclectic. So he was reading a lot of different sources. He was interested in occultism, contemporary occultism, but also in more ancient sources. And there are traditions, for instance, with which he was familiar and he was very interested in, that are really peculiar also to the history of Portugal. For instance, the tradition of Sebastianism, or the tradition of the Fifth Empire. These are traditions that have to do with a kind of prophetic millennialist tradition that has been particularly strong in Portugal. So the combination of all these different sources make for a kind of system that is very difficult to describe and to synthesize. Another important problem is the fact that clearly Pessoa goes through different phases in his life, so there is a kind of evolution. The problem is that since he didn't publish really these sources, sometimes it is difficult to reconstruct exactly the steps of this evolution, because you cannot refer, for instance, to a printed or a published source where there is a date on it, and then you can say, okay, this must belong to that period in his life. You have a huge amount of loose papers, loose sheets, sometimes typewritten, sometimes handwritten, and it is very difficult, especially for the non-specialist, to determine exactly to which period in his life a particular piece of paper belongs. So this is where, for instance, the expertise of Jeronimo is fundamental, because he is quite familiar with the ink, for instance, or the handwriting, the style of the handwriting, which has changed over the years, the particular kind of paper that he used in a particular period. Now, these are all philological aspects in this research that are extremely important, because they allow us to determine exactly what are the main features of this evolution, of this development in his thought. Anyway, to give a kind of very broad idea, because of course we cannot enter into too many details, I would say that probably one of the aspects that are quite striking about Pessoa's esotericism is the fact that he is a kind of dualist. And to some extent, maybe there could be an interesting analogy with Swedenborg, which is interesting because he doesn't refer to Swedenborg so much. I think there is one reference in one place, but he doesn't seem to be really a reader of Swedenborg. So probably it's something that is very much mediated through occultist literature and other sources. But there is a kind of strong dualism in the fact that he posits a strong division between material reality and spiritual reality. Obviously, the spiritual reality is much more important. And so the ability of the esotericist is to go through the material reality with a particular vision, so to open the eyes to the existence of the spiritual reality, and through forms of initiation, of spiritual advancement, penetrate into the spiritual reality. I think this is also very close to a form perhaps of Gnosticism. He considered himself a Gnostic, and he speculates a lot about Gnosticism. There is a whole series of writings about Gnosticism. So I think that this is the kind of general structure of his thought. The difference from Swedenborg is that for Pessoa, you never seem to reach, let's say, the other side. It's not that there is the material reality and the spiritual reality, and they are like that, and they are in a kind of mutual relationship as in Swedenborg. With Pessoa, it seems like the spiritual reality itself always hides a further reality. So it's a kind of mise en abîme, in the sense that you can go very far, but there is always something beyond that, and beyond and beyond. So it's a never-ending process to some extent, and you never seem to be able to reach the end. So this is something that filters through the esoteric texts, of course, but also in his poetry. So in his literary creations, sometimes the esoteric visions that he has are very much present. So in this sense, perhaps we have a case that is not too dissimilar to that of other literary authors of the 20th century. Probably the most famous comparison would be with William Butler Yeats. Pessoa, interestingly enough, was also familiar with some of the teachings and the structure of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And this was through the readings that he made of partly of Aleister Crowley, but Aleister Crowley had his own interpretation of this, which was very peculiar and idiosyncratic, but also Arthur Edward Waite. Arthur Edward Waite is clearly a very important source to Pessoa. Pessoa was also very interested in Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, alchemy, and many of his ideas and notions about these traditions are coming from Waite. It's because he's reading Waite.
That's what I find so interesting, because we've been taking a look. We made a discovery tour through our library to see how many of the sources that are enlisted in his library can be found here. And it's quite amazing, I must say, because it's quite a broad survey of all the topics here. And one of the first questions I had, for instance, on theosophy, he's even translated Blavatsky, and he's translated others in this field. His encounter with theosophy, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism is through books, isn't it? It's not through encounters with people.
It's a very interesting aspect of Pessoa's personality. He was not a joiner. He was an explorer. He was a traveler.
Yes.
But for some reason, he didn't want to belong to a particular group, to a particular movement. So he was actually very well acquainted with the history of Freemasonry, with the rituals of Freemasonry. And we know that he even wrote rituals, because he left some rituals, but we don't know what he was doing with these rituals. It's as if he was writing rituals for orders and groups that never existed, really.
And it's an open question. We don't know if he was a Freemason. Well, maybe we know, but it's a discussion that it's open in Portugal. We don't know if he was initiated, and it's also an open discussion. And the way he was affiliated or not to a secret society, it always looks as if he was a secret, obscure student of these subjects, and not exactly a member. There's no clear membership, I think, but that's an open discussion.
Well, I'm truly fascinated now, because we have been going through the material that we have found in the library, all the books that we have found. There's so many connections, and you have told me that there's so much material that's there ready to be researched, but not yet published. But I was privileged, I guess, and saw a glimpse of some wonderful material that we, as the Ritman Library, would be delighted to see more of. For instance, there was a beautiful poem quoting the Fama Fraternitatis, and it is a poem on Christian Rosenkreutz, No Túmulo na Christian Rosenkreutz. Could you enlighten us a bit?
Well, we did this work in the library looking for sources mentioned by Pessoa in his books, and the esoteric library. Many books in Pessoa's private library are here in the Bibliotheca in Amsterdam, and between those books we find the Fama Fraternitatis, we found Arthur Edward Waite, we find Whitman's, we find books like this. This is Mead. Well, this is Waite.
There was about the Great Pyramid.
The Great Pyramid. Some books on Freemasonry. I was looking for this one. This was published, I think, in '31, and is Pessoa interested in Freemasonry in the 5 last years of his life.
Manly Pirol even he read.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, well, we did the research on all these books. It's an ongoing research, and in terms of Christian Rosenkreutz, we have at least one very famous poem. Pessoa left maybe 30, 40 poems that we can consider esoteric, explicitly exoteric. Sometimes they are published together with Mensagem, the book that he published in '34. And this is a very famous poem, No Túmulo de Christian Rosenkreutz. I can read the Portuguese, the beginning, and Marco might read the English. Quando despertos deste sono, a vida, soubermos o que somos e o que foi esse mal, essa queda, esta descida, até ao corpo noite que a alma obstrui. This is the beginning of the poem.
Oh my god, I didn't expect this. So I have to do the English translation. So I will try to improvise a little bit. So when we wake up from this dream, which is life, we will know what we are and what was this evil, this search, this descent until the body, which is the shadow that closes up the soul, that encloses the soul. So the message is very clear. The soul that descends into the body as if a prison
And then the legend of
becomes
Christian
free again,
Rosencrantz.
becomes free again when we die. And at that moment we realize that our mortal material life was just a dream. And that we wake up to the real life, which begins only after we have been through this process.
Yes,
Because this is the moment when the soul begins its ascent back to the original source.
well, that's truly fascinating, because in the Fama, there's of course this beautiful fragment where the brothers of the Brotherhood, the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, discover the grave room or temple of Christian Rosencrantz. And there one of the axiomata is that he, during his life, made the compendium of all knowledge, all wisdom, to a grave.
Yes, and in fact this was very much present in the Golden Dawn and in the Rosicrucianism that was so strong in England at the end of the 19th century. In fact, in the Golden Dawn they tried to reconstruct the vault, the tomb of Christian Rosencrantz, and some of the rituals of the Golden Dawn were based precisely on the description of the Fama Fraternitatis. And the idea was that in the tomb, the body, the uncorrupted body of Christian Rosencrantz would be present.
Yes.
And that there would be also the moment of return to life.
Well, this is really fascinating, and in a way you could say that this whole living heritage of Pessoa that has been found in a trunk by accident maybe, is now unveiled, and we will learn a lot more about it.
The uncorrupted body.
Exactly, it's like an uncorrupted body of wisdom. It is. I think it was not accidental. I think that Pessoa constructed his life to live for posterity, an uncorrupted body. I think we are working on that uncorrupted body of wisdom of Fernando Pessoa. And even if we go to history in 85, when he was, when his body was translated, moved to a monastery in Lisbon, it was uncorrupted. And it was a problem, and they could not bury Pessoa in 85 in Lisbon because they thought it was going to be a corrupted body, and it was not. So physically and metaphorically, I think Pessoa today, his body, the body of his papers, his trunks, are part of that big, mythical, uncorrupted body.
Well, I can only be grateful that you found our library and you acquainted us with this uncorrupted body of wisdom, and I hope I will learn a lot more of what is to come as a result of your collaboration, the publication that you're preparing now. And I can only hope that many people come to the library for such discovery tours as yours, because my experience in the library is that we are hermetically open. We open our doors to visitors in general and specialists, of course, and many times we learn a lot ourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you.